You can't talk to a single team of people in the space industry without finding a diehard Trekkie.
This is Space for All. Welcome back to Space for All. I'm your host, Valerie McKiernan. I am so excited to kick off season 2 with an incredible guest, Amy Imhoff. Today, we're diving into the world of Star Trek, real-world space exploration, and the undeniable impact of representation in STEM. Amy is a digital marketing specialist, events manager, and advocate for diversity in aerospace. She's worked with NASA, Space Force, and get this, she's Kate Mulgrew's media director. That's right, Captain Janeway herself. So strap in, grab your tricorder, and let's launch into an episode that's equal parts fandom, science, and a whole lot of passion for the future of space. Amy, thank you so much for being here today on the Space for All podcast. This is the launch point for season 2, which I'm very, very pumped about. I can't believe we have actually gotten here. But I know we're going to talk about Star Trek and on different TV shows and stuff, but let's start at what you do. How did you get into the space industry?
Well, thank you for having me. This is wonderful, and I'm excited to be here for season 2 of Space for All. So I came into the aerospace industry through technology writing and through Star Trek. So what I do is I am a digital marketing specialist and events manager. That encompasses a lot of things, from partnerships to different kinds of writing for technology, writing for STEM education, and also, like, I like to say STEAM versus STEM these days, because the arts are such a complementary and inextricable part of space. So right now I am working on a NASA mission through Princeton University, the IMAP mission. So please follow us on Facebook and Instagram, IMAP Space Mission. I'm doing their social media and a little bit of just outreach and awareness, because I feel like people don't have a great working knowledge of what NASA is doing right now. The layperson does not. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aerospace professionals and they are well versed. But I want the wider fandom of Star Trek, and of course all people who are interested in space, which is cool. We work in a cool industry, to know what we're doing, to know what everybody's up to. And that includes uplifting diverse voices, making sure that those are heard. I do a lot of panels. I've hosted over 100 panels at various conferences, conventions, and some virtual, of course, during COVID, when we all had to switch over to virtual. And and I'm published also in a couple of anthologies and occasionally on various websites when I have time to pitch them and write something. But I have written some commentary on mostly feminist commentary on various pieces of media, or occasionally I will comment on like the state of fandom and the state of the industry.
Yeah.
So that's and I got into that. I'm Kate Mulgrew's media director. She plays Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager.
Very cool.
And if other fans out there of Kate's work, Orange is the New Black, she played Red, the prison chef, the Russian prison chef.
Yes.
And she is going to be on another show really soon on Apple TV called Dope Thief.
Okay.
Going to be very interesting. Brian Tyree Henry is the lead. And that was filmed in Philadelphia, which is right near where I grew up and near where you currently live.
Yeah. Well, okay. So how did you end up in PR for Star Trek? It's just like you loved it growing up and then you just found your way into that part of the industry?
Yes. So I started doing panels at Star Trek conventions in 2012. I had been attending as a fan since like 2009, 10-ish, just with my friends. And I saw that there were women up there talking about the impact of the female characters on Star Trek and how it led them into different fields. And I have my master's in English literature, and I am a marketing storyteller. I like to tell people's stories. And I thought it was important to tell the story of how, especially women in our generation, had been impacted by seeing these very different, very cool women on TV in the 90s. Mm-hmm. It is a bit of a studied effect when it comes to Scully from the X-Files, who's also one of my loves. I love the X-Files. I love Gillian Anderson. And Um, she's fabulous. And the Scully effect is studied. The Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media
Okay.
has done an official study on it, but it's been a documented effect for quite a while. So if you Google search the Scully effect, you'll find a lot of info,
Wow.
which is the women, after seeing Scully growing up in the 90s and seeing her, chose more career paths in forensic pathology and law enforcement. So Scully was a very unique character for the 90s. X-Files debuted in 1993. And if you look at the TV landscape from that period, we get a lot of Baywatch and sitcom moms and Roseanne. And
Yeah.
there were not really a lot of like professional career women who were doing serious STEM field type work. And there's also Buffy. Buffy debuted, right, I think. So Janeway came on the scene in 1995 with Star Trek Voyager, and there were already some really fabulous women in the Star Trek legacy. And the culmination of that was having a female captain finally in 1995. Yeah.
Yes.
So I grew up watching Janeway. I was 12 when Voyager debuted, and just seeing her showing that like leadership skill set, and also seeing that there was a Latina chief engineer on Voyager. They added 7 of 9 later, which is she's like a Borg drone character that they brought on initially for sex appeal, but her trajectory has been very interesting throughout the character's arc. Came back recently on Star Trek Picard, which is very cool.
Okay.
And just seeing these women, and I had loved Star Trek since I was 7 years old. And I had watched The Next Generation with Patrick Stewart, and I saw 2 fabulous ladies, Gates McFadden playing the ship's doctor, and Marina Sirtis playing the ship's counselor. And she was always on the bridge. She was right there next to Picard. She was in the middle of the action. I mean, Dr. Crusher is the doctor on the Federation flagship. Like, that's a big deal for a woman to occupy that position in medicine in Starfleet. And she was also a single mom. She remains the only single mom of all of the Star Trek characters that we've seen since then.
Wow.
Wow. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with Will Wheaton, who plays her son on the show. And she's a great advocate for STEM. She said, Gates has said, I've gone in for surgery, and doctors have been like, it's Dr. Crusher. We all have to be on our best behavior. We have to kick ass in this surgery. I love that all the actors will tell you that, they will tell you that they just encounter fans at every point in their life whose lives were changed by watching this diverse group of people, whether it's, African-American representation, female representation, now recently with Discovery, they finally had 2 gay characters, like LGBT. Star Trek has had been at the forefront in the 60s, especially with a diverse cast that, they put a Japanese man and a Russian man on the bridge together because they saw that the Cold War was happening, and the civil rights movement in the 60s, things have always been crazy. Like, we think we're having crazy now. The 60s were just as crazy, if not more.
Yeah.
So Star Trek has always come out of conflict and a desire for showing humanity working together to solve big problems.
Yeah. I mean, that's remarkable just in the diversity that Star Trek has brought to the space industry, just like you're saying, with people watching. In addition to diversity, what other ways has Star Trek influenced the space industry from your perspective?
I think it's just you can't talk to a single team of people in the space industry without finding a diehard Trekkie, which is awesome.
So true.
I love it. It's so true. And military. I had worked with the Space Force in 2023 on their inaugural conference. Like I had mentioned earlier, events management is part of my wheelhouse, and I planned the entire, 2.5-day schedule, the stage management, all of the 4-star generals that had to get their butts up on that stage. Yeah. They had to listen to me, the stage manager, all the, VPs at Blue Origin and, all sorts of companies. And every single day of the conference, I wore a different Star Trek badge because there's different badges for different eras of Star Trek. And there's also ones for different departments. And every single day I got compliments and everyone wanted to know where I had gotten my badges. And I had the generals showing me on their phones the times that they had dressed up for Halloween, wearing their Star Trek uniform. I had one of the generals was like, here I am dressed as Captain Picard and my wife is Dr. Crusher. And I was like, I'm so happy for you. It was great. Honestly, it's a lovely talking point. It was great. It lets me talk about working with Kate, because I'm not an official franchise hire. I am a Kate hire. And I am also just a fan creator. There are a lot of fan creators in the Star Trek space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, some of the real world space applications that have developed,
Yes.
of course we have PADS, which are, that PADD, the Star Trek acronym is an iPad. It's an iPad.
Yeah.
Our phones in our pockets, like the communicators, they would flip open on the, Bluetooth. They make Star Trek badges now with Bluetooth in them, so you can press them and talk.
That's cool.
And there's like a lot of cool things that fans have made also, because the licensing for the show is very interesting. We'll not get into the many insanities that are like what has happened with Paramount and Viacom and the merger, the corporate aspect of Star Trek. The technology our technology currently in 2025 has outpaced like the laptop you see on Captain Picard's desk. Like an iMac or a MacBook Air is like much more sleek than the things that you saw in the 80s and Next Generation, but they did a great job.
Yeah.
Like the props people, and whenever they had to come up with something new and different, they really rose to the occasion. And I think the technology, are, like I said, people are trying to solve warp drive. They're trying.
I saw an article about that recently.
Yeah, Dr. Chance Glenn was one of the guys who I had met that has at Star Trek conventions. One of the fun things that you can do is have a science track, and I've been a big part of some of the science tracks, especially recently. Star Trek Long Island. The big Star Trek Con in Vegas. I had done that for years. Not so much in the last few years, but Vegas is crazy. but I've been hosting parties in Vegas instead, because I feel like that's a better way to like draw people over and say like we're having a women in STEM party. We were sponsored by Roddenberry Foundation for our catering, and Colleen McLeod donated some spirits, and that was great. She's lovely, and the alcohol and space aspect, because I worked with Explore Mars, and their CEO Chris Carberry did a book on alcohol and space, and it's that kind of thing is really, if you're having alcohol and partying in space, it's like creating culture in space.
I think I didn't think of that.
Those things are very tied into Star Trek, because Star Trek has its own. They make Romulan ale, they make Klingon blood wine, they make there's a Star Trek spirits federation. There's I think 2 or 3 companies that make officially licensed Star Trek alcohol.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and they make signature Captain Kirk bourbon, because he's from Kentucky bourbon, like that kind of thing. So
is there a technology that's on the show that that hasn't been developed yet that you really hope makes its way here?
Well, I would love it if there were transporters, so I don't have to get on a plane. I mean, I don't like to. The annoying process of air travel and having to go through security and wait at your gate and then wait to take off and then you sit on the tarmac for a million years. That I would love to skip.
I wonder what the security would be, right? Like if you could portal somewhere. You obviously couldn't portal into the White House. I wonder how that security would work.
Yeah, well, they have thing where you can put a shield over something, and it's a no beam zone, like that kind of thing. But, it's like on what is it? I was going to make a Harry Potter reference. You can't apparate directly into Hogwarts grounds. Yeah, it's like that. There's you can't apparate directly into Starfleet headquarters, right?
Yeah. Obviously, my brain goes right there. As everything you say, I'm like, let's see if that was in Harry Potter. There's crossover.
Yes. But yeah, and I think also the warp drive technology, faster than light travel, is in kind of every sci-fi franchise, we have something. They always say on Battlestar Galactica, spool up the FTL faster than light. They have lots of different, the Expanse, they tell the story in one episode of how they developed this drive technology that allows people to it's just like a constantly renewing energy that lets people travel fast. Okay. So that people are trying to solve those kind of things. I don't think we're ever going to get to transporters because it literally melts your body and then reassembles your atoms. So I think you would die. And there's always like, if they want to kill somebody, like, oh, there was a transporter accident. Yeah. So I think that, then I also have, I worked with Above Space Development Corps, and they are trying to put a space station in orbit with a half G of gravity, and solving gravity in orbit is a big problem. Yeah. We don't have that. We can't. People thinking, every sci-fi show, everyone shows you walking off like a transport ship onto the bridge of a starship, and with no issues with gravity, no issues with, having to do, like, sometimes they'll show like a vacuum seal in different shows, where you have to do it through space to make sure the vacuum is sealed out. But it's always very easy.
You just hit a button.
You just hit a button. And it's also like, oh, we're going to turn the gravity off. Like that is not a thing. That's not a thing that happens in real life, turning gravity on and off. And if we could have solved gravity in space right now, we would have, because zero G is very bad for the human body, as we have seen from all of the astronaut studies that have been done on the ISS. So that, I think, are the ones that I would love to see, but I think are very far away.
When we were talking previously, you had mentioned like boots, like gravity boots.
Oh, yes. Yeah, on the Expanse, they show gravity boots on Star Trek too, like if they have to go outside and walk on the hull of the ship. But if for some reason the gravity, they're having, there's a malfunction, something, they hit our gravity center of our computer, and we have to turn off the gravity. There are boots on Star Trek, but it's more shown on the Expanse as like kind of a general fact of life, like, oh, we're all wearing our gravity boots, or there's if there's a tool that is not stored properly before they take off, it can cause grievous injury. But I think that's accurate, right? I think that it would, the way that we would have to move through space and G-forces and things like that is, you would want everything to be secured. And I know NASA makes sure everything is secured when they send things up. They don't want, like, those zero G indicators are always something fluffy and cute so it doesn't hurt the equipment.
Right.
So like that, you have to make sure that you don't damage your very expensive equipment.
Yeah. So right when we started talking, we were talking about diversity and representation, and how Star Trek has been on the forefront of that ever since since its inception. Obviously, we are in a time right now in the real world where diversity is kind of getting sidelined and not focused on and defunded. What are your thoughts on the current state of the space industry specifically? Because obviously this is hitting every government industry, but what are your thoughts on the space industry?
Well, I would like to say that for two men who are very into the idea of Star Trek, speaking Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they are not behaving in a very Star Trek fashion. They are not supporting the principles that like the Federation was like founded on. And there's a lot of literature and people who have spent a lot of time as creators on the show creating this world. IDIC is the principle of Star Trek that has been in place since the 60s. That's IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. So diversity is right there, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And it's basically the principle that if we are all different and bring something different to the table, that we're going to have even better, even more extensive solutions than we ever would have if we were all the same. And I think that definitely applies to the Star Trek mindset and to the space industry, because, Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura on the original series, she recruited for NASA. NASA recognized that they had an issue where it was only white guys. Yeah. We've only ever put white on the moon. They brought Nichelle in and said, we really want you to recruit for NASA. And she looked around and she said, I don't see my people. I don't see any women. I don't see any people of color. And they said, all right. So they, Jose Hernandez and Mae Jemison and all of these
Yeah.
really prominent astronauts who are the first, Mae Jemison being the first
Mm-hmm.
African American woman in space. She had a walk-on role on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Perfect.
Big,
Yeah.
big, perfect. Yes, perfect. And now it's Dr. Cyan Proctor, who is the first African American woman to pilot a
Mm-hmm.
spacecraft. She's a huge Trekkie, and I've been trying to bring together the people who make Star Trek, whether it's actors or producers, creatives, production folks, with the boom of people who are now in the commercial
Yes.
space sector. Like NASA and Star Trek have had a relationship
Mm-hmm.
since the 60s. That it was very, of course, NASA would want to capitalize on the popularity of, the first shuttle was named Enterprise, and the original cast were there to like christen it and, have a nice little ceremony and everybody get pictures with them, because all of these astronauts were so inspired by seeing the diversity on the bridge of the ship and seeing Captain Kirk say, a white man say, when you come out onto this bridge, you leave your bigotry in your quarters. And, just very important things that have been said. And it's funny because William Shatner has gone to space. He went up with Jeff Bezos.
Good, yeah.
Jeff Bezos, one of Jeff Bezos' first companies was named after Zefram Cochrane, who is the father of warp drive on Star Trek. And people don't realize like what a major nerd he is. That's a deep cut, right? And you are seeing these people who are hoarding all of the wealth, and while I'm glad that billionaires are invested literally and figuratively in space and in growing our footprint in space, what is happening right now in this administration is not okay. And it's ultimately going to hurt us, and it's probably going to lead to, I'm sure it's going to lead to tragedy, and it's not the way to go. There has never been a time in history when the good guys were the ones banning books and labeling people and dumping all of our problems on trans people who are literally less than 1% of the population. It's replicating what we saw in Nazi Germany. We have someone out here, Elon Musk, doing a goddamn Nazi salute. That's what it is. People need to accept that, you can be a huge proponent of SpaceX. You can be very excited that Gwen Shotwell is their COO, and all the engineers that are working on Starship. Like, I'm sure that they do not like the idea that they are being represented by a literal Nazi, because Elon Musk's grandparents were Nazis. If you look it up, they were part of the Nazi party, and he grew up in apartheid South Africa, which is a very racist. I had to read so much literature on Holocaust narrative and apartheid South Africa. Like, when you're studying these periods, the literature that came out of these periods is it's a blueprint for what not to do. Like, don't oppress people, don't kill people, don't other them and marginalize them. And we're seeing women's names being stripped off of websites, whether it's government or private. We're seeing people, not being allowed to say women in STEM.
Yeah, that's where I really start to.
Been in the rhetoric for decades.
Yeah, it's one thing
now.
to go about correcting government spending, right? That's like one thing. It's another thing completely to defund every, STEM, every, diverse club, whatever, but not being allowed to talk about, like, that doesn't make sense to me, not being able to talk about diversity in the industry or be able to promote it or push it and things like that. Because we're not suggesting you hire people because they're a woman. We're suggesting you still hire the right person for the job, but influence more diverse candidates to come to the table and more people to get involved. But that's what the podcast is about, right? Space for all, space for everyone.
Yeah, space for all. And it's funny. It's funny because we have a shortage of STEM talent in this country. And when I worked with the Space Force, a lot of the conversations around workforce development centered on attracting young people into the sciences. And I don't know if they've taken a look at what young people do now on social media. First of all, I think they're not meeting people where they are. Most people are on social media, and yes, you need to pay to play. Obviously Meta and Google have created a lot of barriers when it comes to algorithms and
Yes.
promoting that were not there 10,
Yeah.
15 years ago. But companies need to put money behind their marketing departments, and they need to reach talent where they are, and
Right.
kids are on social. You really need to showcase to these kids, like, they're not going to want to work at your stodgy, boring company that doesn't have any cool people representing it. And I am sure every single company out there has someone cool that you can highlight on
Yeah,
social media,
absolutely.
to send to a high school or to a grade
Mhm.
school to talk to kids. You know, and I know engineers are very introverted, and I know that this is kind of a difficulty. And I am not introverted. That's why
Yeah.
I do what I do. It's like I'm not a science communicator the way somebody like Emily Calandrelli or Bill Nye or, you know,
Mhm.
but I am someone who wants to work with folks like this in order to, you know, get them speaker gigs, get them in front of the right people, you know,
Yeah.
inspire kids to go into STEM, you know, boys, girls, doesn't matter. But girls especially are really, they start to get very interested in STEM around like age 10 and 11.
Yes.
And then it falls off around
Right.
age like 14, 15. And that's, you and I became acquainted through the
Yep.
Cosmic Girls Foundation because we wanted to be involved in that process. It's for girls ages 14 to 19 because by then, you know, you're like dating and makeup and boys and, you know, all of the fun girly stuff that
Yeah.
we should also celebrate, also encourage. You can totally be a girly girl and still be interested in how the world works, interested in how physics and chemistry work. My mother grew up in a very sexist time when women were only really could be nurses, secretaries, or teachers. Like that was really the only option for women growing up in, you know,
Yeah.
the 50s and 60s. And, you know, I think that that really damaged the way she viewed the patriarchy and the way, you know, she's my mom's someone who always like very much caters to men, caters to, but she was taught that, right? You know, and the media she consumed, you know,
Right.
Leave It to Beaver type of stuff, you know, that was, you know, she, how old would she have been when Star Trek came on the air? She would have been in her like late teens, early 20s, like all like past the
Right.
point. I was 7 years old, so I internalized the messaging of Star Trek and seeing a woman on the bridge. You know, even if it's just, you know, just Counselor Troy, who is not,
Yeah.
but you know,
Yeah.
she's not a hard scientist. She's psychiatrist. And or you know, Nichelle Nichols wanted to leave Star Trek because she felt she wasn't
Wow.
getting enough to do, and Martin Luther King Jr. said to her, "You can't leave."
No, I don't know
Oh, you
that
don't know that
story.
story? Oh, that's a great. So that show broke barriers in so many levels. The first interracial kiss was
Wow.
William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols
Okay.
on TV, and it was they had to do it under the force of an alien like making them kiss. Like that's how they got around the censors because people did not want to see a black
My
woman and a white man kissing on
That's
TV. Isn't
insane.
that crazy? And then Deep Space Nine showed two women kissing, and I mean, it was right around the same time that Ally
Okay.
McBeal had the first same sex kiss. So Ally McBeal beat Star Trek by like literal like weeks. It was not a big gap, but you know, showing a character like Jadzia Dax from Deep Space Nine, who is kind of a trans allegory character now because her species has an organism inside that has lived many lifetimes and is passed on from person to person of all genders and professions. So not only do you live your life as you also can live your life with the symbiont and its memories, and it informs your actions. It's a very cool species. You had one of the questions you had was like, what species would you want to like make first contact with? And I was talking about it with my husband last night. I was like, what should I say?
Okay.
And I was thinking Trill. Trill would be a very good because they are not a warlike species, unlike a lot of Star Trek. You know, you have to have bad guys that are conquerors and warlike, you know, Klingons, Cardassians, Romulans.
I'm sorry, there's the Cardassians.
Okay. Cardassians, yes, which came well before a Kardashian, but there are some really hilarious memes where it's like the Kardashian women with like the forehead ridges and like the pale skin of like a Kardashian, which is great.
Okay.
So, but I would say Trill because they get to they are very respectful of life. They're like symbiont creatures that hold they hold the memories of the species, right? So you can have
Okay.
9 lifetimes worth of memories
That's cool.
informing, and
So,
it really just a very cool character in Jadzia Dax, played by Terry Farrell, who is such a wonderful supporter of space and has been on a number of panels with me as a Nana visitor. I know your listeners can't see me, but your viewers would be able to see that I'm holding up Nana's book, which is called Open a Channel,
awesome.
A Woman's Trek.
Oh,
That just
okay.
came out this past October. She interviewed tons of women from across different fields, military, sciences. She's also doing a documentary, which I was very
Oh,
fortunate to be interviewed
cool.
for. Um, Her character on Deep Space Nine is a colonel. She is actually not Starfleet. She's a Federation ally species, a Bajoran, and they're a very religious species. And she was a freedom fighter. She was a terrorist because they were overthrowing the evil Cardassian government, and that's when they became members of the Federation. And it's a whole Deep Space Nine is like, I think, the most
Okay.
it's a political drama. There's a war. It's a very different kind of a Star Trek than the others, and standing the test of time, it has really emerged as one of the leaders in fans' hearts and minds, and just is a really good, because Gene Roddenberry did not want conflict between the crew members. He
Okay.
wanted to show the crew members working together because they were all different. And he wanted the conflict to come from outside. He wanted the conflict to be bad aliens and, like, mind control and weird slime and, all the things that Star Trek's known for. And when Gene Roddenberry passed away, it was right before Deep Space Nine. And they really allowed the characters to have interpersonal conflict from that point onward. And it was to the show's benefit. It's to the actors' benefit because they love a good, rich character that has all these different motivations.
Yeah.
And I think that for the women on the show, that they really stepped it up, because the women on Next Generation are caregivers, doctor and psychiatrist, and they are catering to the men of the crew.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Not in like an obvious way. They're still very strong, fabulous ladies, but a lot of the storylines work pretty gendered,
Okay.
right? It's the 80s. You can't you can't kind of escape that.
Yeah.
But when they came back and they did season 3 of Star Trek Picard in 2022, 23, something like that. I can't believe we're in 2025. Like the time is just, since the pandemic, time is a flat circle. But the season 3, it opened up with Dr. Crusher holding a phaser rifle, shooting some bad guys, and she really never got to do that on the show.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the showing 7 of 9, instead of having her be in these tight cat suit and big heels and big hair,
Yeah.
flat boots, leather jacket, very functional, very we got her out of the cat suit. She's in a Starfleet uniform, and later on, and it just even having like Counselor Troy wearing a uniform, a normal Starfleet uniform. They wanted her to be like the hot chick, so she has a low cut top and a very tight cat suit, and sometimes she wears a dress. And but the other characters, the men and Dr. Crusher, never had to wear stuff like that.
Right.
So it's a costuming choice, but it's a visual cue also. Like, this woman means business. She's a full member of the crew. She can go get her hands dirty with the men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important, like, just there's so many studies surrounding the evolution of the way characters look and act on Star Trek as women. So it's very interesting, and it's a microcosm of and a reflection of our culture and where we were in our culture.
Yeah, and we don't want that to go backwards.
No.
Oh my God.
No, we don't. And I think it's great now that people get annoyed when they show a woman in her underwear on Star Trek. So yes, that's what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. There is one more thing that we wanted to talk about with Star Trek and kind of what it's brought, and that was food insecurity. So how Star Trek addresses that and how we can take that and apply it to our world.
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest things that the aerospace industry can step in and work with the fans who are involved in, and not just the fans, the actors who are involved with different charities. So the charities that the actors have decided to work with really are the recipient of the fan generosity. And we've done it. This will be our fourth one. Trek Talks
Okay.
benefit the Hollywood Food Coalition. We raised $116,000 in a single day last year.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Star Trek fans are very generous. They have a lot of they have disposable income. They're smart people.
Yeah.
And the John Billingsley, who played a character on Star Trek Enterprise, he was on the board of the Hollywood Food Coalition. And Jonathan Frakes, who played Commander Riker and has directed a ton of television, not just Star Trek, he always quotes Gene Roddenberry in saying, "In the 24th century, there will be no hunger, there will be no greed, and every child will know how to read." And I think that that's something that we should all strive for as a society, because we can solve food insecurity right now.
Yeah.
We could solve literacy right now. And I think those are great ideals for people who are, maybe feeling that there's not something that they could do. I'm not a scientist. I'm not I'm not someone with a ton of money. You can still donate food to a food pantry. You can donate your time and serve at a soup kitchen. When I went out to LA to see the Hollywood Food Coalition, their sites, I went with John because I was, I'm trying to help raise money for them. And, we want to do t-shirts and we want to do, you slap a limited edition on something. What was really funny is the Hollywood Food Coalition symbol are two hands that are next to each other, like facing, your audio listeners facing out. And then in the palm of one hand is a heart. And in the palm of the other hand is like a little bowl, like it's like a little soup coming out, a little steaming. And I was like, make the shirt do this. I'm throwing up the Vulcan salute now. I said, then you can sell it, have the actors sign it, reprint the signatures, when you sign something and then you can reprint the signature over and over again. Yeah. Have the actors sign it, make it in the red, blue, and yellow of the three Star Trek Starfleet colors. Sell those t-shirts. You get some revenue right there from Trekkies. We'll wear them to conventions. Yeah. We'll wear them in our daily lives, and people will say, "What's that?" And you say, "Oh, go to the Hollywood Food Coalition website." And it doesn't have to be Hollywood. That just happens to be John's backyard, and that's where there's a big homelessness problem in California.
Yes,
and the operation there is very impressive, and I kind of learned more about like how much does a refrigerated truck cost? Like how can we they're sharing space right now with other charities that they need their own space to have like a commercial kitchen and like hire chefs, who have culinary expertise, who are happy to donate their time when they, in between their restaurant gigs. And I think it's definitely something. And that reminds me, one of the companies that I had worked with tangentially through Above Space is Shipshape Urban Farms.
Oh,
they're trying to figure out how to grow food in zero G.
Yeah. Okay.
But also, they are converting shipping containers into hydroponic gardens, so to solve issues with people who are in food deserts where they don't have access to fresh produce. So that is a very Star Trek principle, right? Cool. We're converting our existing resources to help people have access to fresh food. And that's very basic. Yeah. Feeding people is very basic that we can do. And I love working with them. And I thought it was so cool what John was able to pull together. Everybody loves him. And all of them, we had 40, 50 actors donate their time last year. And I did a panel on sustainability and diversity in space that will be airing with the Trek Talks event, which is on April 5th, which is First Contact Day. Cool. We were supposed to be. We're usually Martin Luther King weekend. Okay. And the Sci-Fi Sisters are a big. They do lots of hosting, and that is an all Black female podcast.
The Sci-Fi Sisters.
Sci-Fi Sisters, yeah, they're fabulous. They're on the Trek Geeks network. The Trek Geeks guys have really brought in a lot of diverse hosts into their podcast network. So normally it's Martin Luther King weekend, but unfortunately LA suffered the terrible fires, and a number of the Star Trek actors lost their homes. And we said, okay, let's push out the virtual telethon to let everybody has a space to breathe. So we're going to do it on April 5th. Which is First Contact Day, which is the day that Vulcans and humans made first contact. And it's a celebrated Star Trek holiday, right?
You were just in New York. Tell me how that was, what the event was.
Oh, that was fantastic. The event was so it was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. Amanda Wynn, who is a future Blue Origin astronaut, had hosted the event in conjunction with the UN. Amanda had sponsored a bill for sexual assault victims. She was well on her way to having a career in aerospace when she was raped in her last semester at Harvard. And she found out that her rape kit was going to be thrown away after 6 months. And if anyone is familiar with the judicial system, you know that everything takes way more than 6 months if you have if you're prosecuting a rape case. And she and Terry Crews, who was also there, who has also spoken about sexual assault, they, with the help of Obama and the UN, sponsored the Sexual Assault Survivors Act, and that activism has really catapulted her into the public eye, and she was able to make peace with her experience and feel like she had helped other women, which she certainly has. And then she has planned this event to recognize all the women in space. So a lot of really cool astronauts. It was the largest gathering of female astronauts, I think, ever.
That's awesome.
There were 16 of them, which is, feels like a low number. But when you consider that, like, what are we around now? Over 750 people have been to space. Almost
and Emily was
and
the
only
100th. So
100th just happened right before Thanksgiving,
yes.
I think.
Yes.
So only like 1/7 of those people are women. So we're celebrating a lot of cool. Bill Nye was there to talk about the importance of removing barriers for women in STEM and making sure that women were part of the conversation. And also, I love that it didn't just focus on we have to get girls into science. It was once women are employed at these companies, we have to make sure to provide environments where they do not fear sexual assault, sexual harassment, things like being discredited and discounted in meetings because you're a woman. There've been so many studies on, for example, if a woman speaks 25 to 30% of the time, the men in the room will say that she is dominating the conversation. Really? Yeah, there's like so many interesting studies about the way gender interactions are perceived in a boardroom, basically. So we wanted to talk about supporting women throughout their careers and making sure that they have what they need to be successful, and also that they are listened to when they say, hey, this person is harassing me. And if that, I mean, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Gamergate and everything that happened in the gaming industry a few years back with women who are working at some of these gaming companies who are, regularly and in regularly sexually assaulted, regularly not believed. And I think that once I think Terry Crews spoke so well about it, because he talked about how this is not a woman's problem. This is a human problem, and men need to do better. And I think Patrick Stewart has spoken about domestic violence. And he had a book come out last year where he talked about his life, but he had spoken about his mother frequently at conventions. And his father was an alcoholic who hit his mother. He had PTSD from being in the war. And he, the police would say, well, you must have done something to upset him, Mrs. Stewart. And Patrick Stewart was like, no. He's like, this is not a woman's problem. This is a men's problem. And we all need to work, so he has worked with domestic violence organizations in the UK and the US. And I'm glad that these men with big audiences and big voices are speaking out, especially like someone like Terry Crews, like super ripped and like, big sports guy, right? Like he's saying, like, if I was sexually assaulted, then it shows everybody that it doesn't matter what you look like, what your musculature is, what your stature is. And it can happen, and you have to speak up against it. And he talked about silence, and he talked about how we're not going to be silent, and he talked about how men are not given the emotional tools to have conversations about their feelings, and that's what leads to a lot of this internalized hatred of women.
When I used to go into big conference rooms and things like that, I would be the only female in there'd be 12 men or whatever. And I used to get so frustrated because I would leave that meeting, and I most likely was leading that meeting. Like I was leading it, but I would leave that meeting few months later, I would meet one of the people again that was in that conference room, one of the guys that was in there, and they wouldn't remember me. And I was like, I was the only female in that room and I was leading the meeting. How did you not remember me, but you remembered many of the other men in there? So I had to start fixing that
Yeah.
for myself. But I constantly thought, this is your problem, not my problem. Like for some reason I probably sounded annoying to you, or you probably didn't take me seriously or something like that. But instead I read a bunch of literature on how I can make myself more memorable in a room full of men without having to wear something scandalous.
Right. And I feel like, yeah, and I'm just talking about this with Mindy Howard on the Cosmic Girls podcast, wearing something scandalous and how you present yourself professionally. And, I have, and this is true for the women on across the board in any professional setting. And I still believe that you are in a male dominated field unless you are a nurse, librarian, or teacher. There's like very few industries that we can go into where we would be the majority.
Right.
And if you are dressing scandalously, or if they look you up and they find you on the internet and you're wearing your underwear, it is detrimental to you in a business. And I'm not shaming anybody. I'm not, telling women they can't wear what they want, but there is definitely a certain level of professionalism that you need to maintain if you're going to be taken seriously. And even then, like I love how you phrase that. You're like, I went and I read about how I could be more memorable, instead of like, these guys are being idiots. This is a them problem and not a you problem, but you addressed it like it was a you problem.
What else are you going to do? Like, we have women in business classes. We have women in this classes. We have like women in leadership. There aren't men in leadership classes. There aren't, men in business classes, which frustrates me to no end, because a lot of what you learn in women in leadership classes and a lot of what you learn in those sorts of things are men could take away, positive things from them too. But it's a lot of like how to make sure the tone of your voice is XYZ, so that in a meeting you present this way. And it's just like, why the hell do I have to change the way I approach this when a man doesn't? Exactly. That's ridiculous. So it should just be leadership classes that anyone goes to.
Well, you just reminded me that we had talked earlier about the Scully effect, but I believe that, and there's a little bit written about this, and mostly because I have encouraged it, but the Janeway effect is women in leadership. So seeing Kate Mulgrew on the bridge of Voyager in a leadership position, all the men say yes, ma'am. All the her crew listens to her and views her as the true leader, and that's an important part too, is to show everyone around her being supportive. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Stacey Abrams are huge Janeway fans, and they have mentioned her over and over again. This past summer at the DNC, the nomination process for Kamala, AOC was on Jimmy Kimmel, and he said, "How did you become, this woman leader that you are today?" And she said, "Captain Janeway of the Star Trek Voyager." And I was like, yes. So of course I went online and I shared a bunch of stuff. And so one of my first things that I did with Kate was we surprised AOC at her last rally before she got elected. Oh my
gosh, that's awesome.
So the person who was introducing her, Kate was off to the side. We kind of hit her over to the side, and then I'm taking video of, I'm standing there so I can see Kate behind AOC, and then AOC's in the foreground waiting to go onto the little stage. We at this at the venue we were in, which was not a big venue, but it was packed with people who were so excited about her running for office. And her campaign manager said, "Well, before we bring Alexandria up here, there's someone else here who wants to introduce her."
I just got chills.
She said, and she started reading like Kate's credentials, like, "You might know her from Orange is the New Black, but I think Alexandria knows her as Captain Janeway." And she like freaked the hell out. It was awesome. She was like, I mean, and then Kate comes out of like, behind where she was kind of hiding, and she gave her a big hug, and she said, you're amazing. What you're doing is incredible. And I mean, if Captain Janeway, literally, I had never met her before in my life, and she came out from the side and told me that I was amazing. Like, she was crying. Like, she was like, she could not believe that Kate was there to support her. And I was so thrilled to be able to facilitate something like that, because I have been there when, when I first met her when I was a teenager, and I would go to, see her in a play or see her at a convention. I was always just so excited and so overwhelmed. And then to be a professional woman who is working toward changing our country, working toward making things better for people. And then you see Kate come out and be like, Captain Janeway is voting for you. Like, it was so cool. And we got to take pictures, and she was just beside herself. She was so happy. And Kate has been messaging me in the last couple of months, and has been like, I need to get in touch with AOC again. I want to help. I want to do things to support women in office and support, sanity.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, even like I get told all the time, why don't you go into politics? And I'm like, it's just so daunting. Like, you just get torn down no matter what you do. And I can't even imagine.
Have you seen there's a meme where it's two little kids and they're crying in the corner, and then there's a bunny in the foreground, and the bunny's like, nibbling on something, and the kids are crying because they're scared of the bunny for some reason. And it always is labeled differently. So this one is, the bunny is AOC and the crying kids in the corner are like, Republican men.
Good.
It's so good.
I like that.
Good. I hope she scared you.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today on the Space for All podcast. I love talking to you, and I can't wait to see you again soon.
Me too. Thank you so much, Valerie. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for joining us today on the Space for All podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or iTunes, and you can watch full episodes on YouTube. We hope you will join us again for the next episode of Space for All, where we can all find a place in space.